Welcome to this tutorial. This one's about acrylics, painting in acrylics. I find that acrylics are probably one of your easiest and best places to start painting if you're starting out, because acrylics can be quite cheap. You can use cheap acrylics in this case. You can paint on almost any surface. I'm going to be painting on about an A3 size white canvas. It's a pre-primed canvas, which means it's already been covered with a white primer. With acrylics, you can paint on many different surfaces. I'll start by sketching out the basic scene. You could use a pencil, or you could work directly with a brush with pretty much any color, because you'll find that acrylics will cover all your mistakes as well as your pencil lines, and you might also get a little bit, disillusioned perhaps, where you do a lot of sketching and then you put in the trees and things, and your acrylics will probably cover it, because we're going to be covering the background, working from the sky, coming forwards to mountains, and coming closer and closer to the foreground. So a lot of your sketching will actually be covered. Don't worry about that. You've got a fairly good idea once you've sketched, and provided you've got good reference that you're working from, or references, you can always refer back to the reference, and you can always draw in again over your sky or over your mountains, which you'll probably see later on in this tutorial. So I'm just sketching. I'm using in this case, a water-soluble pencil. It can be any pencil, and I'm putting in the basic sort of elements, which are going to be shapes. Perspective is not so important on this sort of scene, because you're looking at a sort of flat horizon. You haven't really got elements coming into perspective, like buildings, what have you, that are in your foreground, which we'll probably see in later tutorials. But this one is fairly linear. In other words, everything is in sort of layers in a horizontal pattern. But you will worry about your light source, and you will worry about your positive and negative shapes, basically shapes that are in shadows, like rocks, or where the light is not touching that part of your land. And then of course your highlights, where the sunlight or the light is touching the land. So I'm sketching in this sort of areas. This is a scene. It's based on a scene in Exmouth in England, where the tide is out. And I'm going to add some elements that don't actually exist, just to make the composition more exciting, more appealing. If you feel worried about losing your pencil lines and your sketch when you start painting, as often it happens, it might be an idea for you to do a separate sketch and keep that sketch next to your painting, and you can refer back to it as you're working, so that if you're covering up areas and you're worried about forgetting where they are or losing them, you can always refer back to your sketch. And here you'll see I'm just carrying on. I'm adding in bits of what will become trees in the foreground, and branches and things in the foreground. A lot of them will get covered up with my paint. So a lot of this is probably unnecessary if you have a separate sketch. I like to have them, I like to feel that I'm composing this painting or this scene with all the elements. I mean, I'm even putting in sort of pencil lines of clouds, where my sky might be totally different, actually, ultimately, to what the sketch is showing. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the sketching part. As you'll see, I haven't put a lot of detail in, because there's no point really, especially if, as I've mentioned, it is going to be covered up. But we're coming to it, and we're going to move on to the painting now. I start painting pretty much with a limited color palette. I'll give you the list of the colors that I'm using. But it's really not too important at this stage, because a lot of these colors will change. But I've got a basic sort of color range of about 7 different colors that I'm working with. But the lesson here is the further further your scene is away from you, i.e. the mountains in the distance, the less colorful they are, the more pastel and more muted and more hazy. So there might be sort of blues and blue grays and little blue purples. And then the closer you get to where you're standing, the sharper the colors become and the crisper the elements and the detail becomes. So obviously the grass or trees or rocks right in the foreground will be much stronger and sharper. And the colors, as you go further away, as I've said, become softer and less obvious, less detail. They merge and they become more sort of grey and murky. But I'm basically blocking out. I'm just really blocking out elements of light and shade. And here we have a quick snapshot of the paper palette I'm working on. These are cheap and they can be thrown away. It's a throwaway palette. Brilliant. I concentrate on the sky. I'm going to go back to the sky quite often. The sky's at this stage is pretty important because you don't want to have to put in your sky afterwards if you can help it, because it's really difficult to work around branches, for example, and try and make your sky look natural. So it's a good idea to make your sky as complete as you can, as early as you can, I feel. You can obviously touch it up, and you might find that you want to change it from a bright sunny day to a cloudy overcast day. But of course, bear in mind that everything else will react according to the sky. The sky pretty much dominates how bright your scene is and how colourful the scene is, especially when it comes to water. If you've got a clear blue sky, you'll have a very reflective, clear, probably blue water. An overcast sky will give you a greyish water or a darker water, less colourful. And the overall scene will be more moody if you've got a stormy or a cloudy sky. For the test piece or pilot piece of this tutorial, I'll stop the audio now, but I will of course be adding full audio to the full lesson on the final tutorial. And of course I'll remove the watermark copyright that I have running through this